Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, where we all honor the 6 million Jewish people killed in the Nazi genocide. And we all vow yet again that it will never happen again.
18 months after the October 7th attacks, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared Hamas will be defeated and the hostages returned. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
For 2 minutes, sirens wailed throughout Israel. The nation comes to a standstill to remember, reflect, and pledge never again. The Holocaust affects nearly every family in Israel and the Jewish world.
I think about my grandfather. He was a Holocaust survivor from Stanislav of Poland, and he was hidden in a barn by righteous Gentiles.
My grandparents, to my regret, were killed, and I don't think we should ever forget what happened.
Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day began here at Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Memorial, where 6 torches were lit to remember the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. 6 Holocaust survivors lit the torches, each with a story of how they survived. This year's Remembrance Day took place 80 years after the end of World War II, and in the shadow of October 7th, the worst atrocity against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared Israel survived that day and will defeat its enemies.
Those who feared that after the October 7 massacre, we would face another Holocaust, saw how we turned the tables. On this Holocaust Day, I promise, the military pressure on Hamas will continue. We will destroy all its capabilities. We will return all our hostages. We will defeat Hamas, and we will prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. To fight vigorously against the fanatical regimes that threaten the entire world, and to do so in a timely manner, this is the main lesson of the Holocaust.
Netanyahu also warned of the threat from a nuclear Iran.
The extremist regime in Iran is a threat to the fate and existence, not only to our future, but to the fate and future of all human society. This is what will happen if it obtains nuclear weapons.
Israel has suggested it will attack Iran's nuclear facilities unless Iran voluntarily destroys them. However, U.S. negotiators seeking a deal to stop Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon are willing to let them have a civil nuclear program.
If Iran wants a civil nuclear program, they can have one just like many other countries in the world have one, and that is they import enriched material.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Iran will have to stop enriching uranium, the main material in a nuclear bomb.
But there's a pathway to a civil, peaceful nuclear program if they want one. But if they insist on enriching, then they will be the only country in the world that doesn't have a weapons program, quote unquote, but is enriching. And so I think that's problematic.
In light of the Holocaust and the shadow of October 7th, it remains to be seen if Israel will feel the need to destroy what they consider another existential threat to their survival. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, given that Iran is one of the most energy-rich countries on the planet, the idea that they're trying to peacefully develop nuclear energy is absolutely laughable. The only reason they're trying to do this is to enrich uranium to create a nuclear weapon, and they've been after it for some time. The longer we delay, the longer we think, okay, sanctions will work or negotiations will work, the closer they get to a nuclear weapon. Well, in other news, as the U.S. is pressing and asking for a peace deal, I got to tell you, Russia just seems to be absolutely mocking us. It's just amazing. On one hand, you're talking peace, and then on another hand, you launch yet another attack on Ukrainian civilians in the capital of Kyiv. The previous one, they tried to excuse it. Oh, it was a mistake and it wasn't intended. Well, this one absolutely was, and it's absolutely horrific to target civilians in a military conflict. There was no military advantage from this attack. It's entirely designed to produce terror in the capital of Ukraine. Ephraim Graham has that story and more from our CBN newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, President Donald Trump is calling on Russia's Vladimir Putin to stop the attacks after an overnight barrage of 215 explosive drones and missiles hit targets throughout Ukraine. In Kyiv, at least 9 people died and 70 others were injured. It came just hours after President Trump criticized Ukraine's President Zelensky when Zelensky refused to agree to a deal that gives the Crimean Peninsula to Russia. Trump said on social media, quote, "The man with no cards to play should now finally get it done." On CBN's Faith Nation, Peter Doran of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy said Zelensky is not the problem.
Vladimir Putin has been inserting all sorts of poison pills into his demands for a ceasefire. And that's important because let's remember, 30 days ago, President Trump negotiated with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and Zelensky said, "We agree to a ceasefire, 0 conditions." Vladimir Putin is the one who is putting on the conditions. He is the true obstacle to a ceasefire at this point.
Yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance said the U.S. has put forth a proposal that would freeze the territorial lines close to current positions. He also said the U.S. is ready to give up if there's no agreement.
We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process.
Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to visit Moscow Friday. The White House is considering plans to slash tariffs on Chinese imports to help ease tensions in the trade war. President Trump suggesting both sides are ready to talk.
We're going to have a fair deal with China. It's going to be fair.
Are you talking to them actively now?
Actively. Everything's active.
The Wall Street Journal reports the president is considering slashing his 145% tariffs on China, somewhere between 50 and 65%. Stores, including Walmart, Target, and Home Depot, warn there could soon be empty shelves in the United States. An associate economics professor at Cedarville University told CBN's Faith Nation negotiations are good news for the markets and businesses.
As you heard the president say, there's active negotiations going on everywhere. And the more we have negotiations, the more there's a possibility for an agreement. The more there's a possibility for an agreement, there's more certainty with businesses and what they can do.
A poll from the Pew Research Center found a majority of Americans disapprove of some of the president's economic actions, including increased tariffs. A dozen states are suing the Trump administration over its tariff policies. President Trump's task force on anti-Christian bias is taking action to protect religious freedom in America. This week, Attorney General Pam Bondi held a news conference alongside some other cabinet members to highlight the problem and the efforts underway to solve them. CBN News White House correspondent Kelly Wright reports.
Attorney General Pam Bondi hosted her first anti-Christian bias task force meeting at the Justice Department. She focused on efforts that are currently underway to end the bias throughout the federal government. Members of the task force include Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and other members of the cabinet, also individuals who have been impacted by anti-Christian bias. Attorney General Bondi says they are focused on identifying unlawful anti-Christian policies, practices, or conduct taking place in government.
As President Trump has stated, the Biden administration engaged in an egregious pattern of targeting peaceful Christians while ignoring violent anti-Christian offenses.
Some of the anti-Christian bias offenses include arrest of Christians peacefully protesting outside abortion clinics. Bondi says the FBI even spied on some Catholic churches. Also, she cited President Biden declaring last Easter as a day of transgender visibility. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche says all forms of bias against any religion must be stopped.
Supporting the free expression of faith is not just a constitutional principle. It is something that all forms of civil government should be encouraging. At its core, the executive order we're here to talk about today affirms a fundamental truth. Every individual has the freedom to choose their religious faith. And once made, that choice should never be subject to discrimination or bias from our government.
President Trump's senior advisor, Paula White of the White House Faith Office, helped organize the president's observance of Easter. During an Easter dinner at the White House, he mentioned the task force.
We're standing up for a persecuted Christian and so many Christians that have been persecuted all over the world. So horrible what's happened. And defending religious liberty. We had nobody fighting for our Christians in other parts of the world that were being so incredibly destroyed, killed.
Attorney General Bondi acknowledges the mission of the task force on anti-Christian bias is daunting, but necessary in order to protect the inalienable rights of every American to worship God free of any discrimination. In Washington, Kelly Wright, CBN News.
And we will continue to follow the work of this task force. Gordon?
And I hope it's successful, and it really does hit the heart of the matter. If you have any doubts that there's some kind of anti-Christian bias in our government today, just take a look at the arrest of a pro-life protester. Here he is on the street, sidewalk with his son, and there's some kind of altercation. And in that, the state court has filed some criminal complaint against him. It's dismissed because the aggrieved party doesn't show up for the court date. And then the federal government gets involved and reinvigorates this and says, we're going to charge you with a felony and we're going to put we're going to put you in jail. And the attorney says, I will voluntarily give my client up. We will appear for him to be booked and all of that process to happen. I'll bring him to you. And instead of honoring that, they descended on his home at dawn and in front of his children with dozens of agents with full SWAT gear and weapons. They arrest him, and it's all designed to put trauma into the pro-life community. Now, at the end of all of that, a jury of his peers found him innocent. But where's the justice? Where's the comeback against both the agents who executed that warrant, but especially the people that ordered it? You had to do that intentionally to unleash that many people with weapons against a civilian. That needs to be brought to light. And who did that? And then why did they do that? What was so bad about him standing on a sidewalk with his son saying, I stand for life? If that so deeply offends you that you have to squash it out of the public debate, well, then you need some education on what the First Amendment really means. That we all have freedom of conscience, we all have freedom of speech and assembly, we all have freedom of religion. And when you try to crush that with the power of the Department of Justice, well then, no, you shouldn't be in that position. You shouldn't hold that kind of power anymore.